I'm Dirk van Velzen. I'm CEO at the Prison Scholar Fund. And thank you so much, Leslie, for inviting me to your conversation. And so I guess this is my moment to introduce myself. So we met through the UCSB Gaucho Facebook group, which is called I Partied in Isla Vista from 95 to 2000 or 99 or something like that. So I was in Isla Vista around those times, but I was not like your traditional student. I was actually on the run from multi-jurisdictional task force, including the FBI, Washington State, California. And that started my journey of who I became today, which is directing a nonprofit that helps prisoners get an education.
So yes, we did meet in the I Partied in Isla Vista group that is, I guess they named it that because I guess you don't really have to go to UCSB to be there. And we'll touch on your intro in just a moment. I do want to ask you, what do you think people's first impression of you is?
That's a really hard question to answer because it's so contextually specific. It depends on what I'm doing. Maybe if I'm on stage doing a presentation for the Prison Scholar Fund, I appear as a social justice warrior, advocate, criminal justice reformer. Maybe somebody sees me on the beach coming up in my scuba gear or, falling down a mountain when I'm skiing. So whatever I'm doing, maybe I'm doing it well, or maybe I'm doing it poorly. So their impression might be a good one, or maybe not so great.
I like that answer because that is true because sometimes we wear many different hats, right? And it's interesting to hear the impressions people have of us as a human based on the hat we're wearing, right? So let's talk about the hat you were wearing in Isla Vista.
Let's talk
Since
about
you
that.
touched on that in your intro, let's just go right there. You mentioned you were not the traditional the student, but you were living it up on the run. So talk to me about that for a moment.
Yeah, so that's really kind of like the middle of my story. So the long story condensed really short was I was a commercial burglar in Washington, and that just means commercial means I was breaking into businesses and stealing things. So probably not the best use of your time when you could be doing other things. But we make terrible decisions when we were kids. And I say kids, I was in my 20s, so I wasn't that young. So long story short, I was on the run from Washington because the fuzz caught on to us. I fled to California. Actually, initially I went to Arizona. So I was committing burglaries in Arizona. And I went there just because I had a motorcycle and there was no helmet law in Arizona. And so I was like, to Arizona I go. And it was sunny. But along that journey, I went out to Santa Barbara because one of my friend's moms lived in Santa Barbara. So we went out there. And on my way home from Santa Barbara, I met a woman. And it was the craziest thing, So I met her, and she was a student at UCSB. And that's my connection there. So kind of on my way out of town, we connected. And I told her a really short version of my story. Like, hey, here's what's really going on with me. Do you still want to connect? And she did. And she, amazingly enough, so I lived with her in the family student housing, which is in Goleta, really a block away from Isla Vista. And lived there for about a year. And then so how I got into the group, of course, was when I was living in Isla Vista, I was also continuing my burglaries in California, of course. And I had met a guy named Colby Dixon, and he's one of the guys in our group. And he introduced me because I think in the group somebody posted a thing that was like, what's the craziest memory you have of Isla Vista? And his craziest memory was scuba diving with me with gear I stole from the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Department. In addition to all their guns, because I broke in the armory too, and I stole all their guns. So that was part of my burglary adventures. And so he introduced me to the group. He's like, hey, he made that comment of, the craziest thing he did was scuba diving with him. Oh, and I was on America's Most Wanted too. So his craziest thing was scuba diving with America's Most Wanted guy who had stolen gear from the Sheriff's Department. But he was a little bit wrong because the stolen scuba gear actually came from a scuba shop. The stuff I stole from the Sheriff's Department was just their guns. But who's splitting hairs, right? So that's probably, I see you're laughing over there. So
I don't have any words. I'm like, it was just like every time I thought, holy cow, there was more.
Oh,
there was more holy cow.
It just keeps on going.
So I do want to get to all of it.
Yeah.
But you mentioned that moving into Isla Vista is kind of the middle of the story, and that you started this crime spree
Yeah.
up in Washington. Can we talk about what led to the crime spree?
I was just young and immature and I was making bad decisions. And my crimes kind of started off small and they just kind of crept into bigger and bigger crimes over time. And I just kind of settled in the burglary game, um, which just means that after doing burglaries for so long, when they finally catch up to you, there's just a whole bunch of burglaries you're accountable for. And then, of course, since I didn't want to be accountable, I just fled. I just,
That would make sense. But I guess part of my question is what was, as you said, the burglaries escalated. Were they escalating because you needed bigger um, scores for something because you needed money? Or was it escalating because you were challenging yourself to see if you could quote unquote get away with it?
yeah, I think the second part, because, everyone wondered if I had like a drug addiction, but it was really just adrenaline. I know that this sounds really crazy, but I really enjoyed the work. I mean, it was kind of fun. It's like we're James Bond. We're like cutting holes in roofs and rappelling in. We had the night vision gear and radios so we could hear the police coming. And like actually sometimes the police did show up, and that's actually when you're having fun. It's like you're already a burglar, which is pretty high risk, but when the cops show up, then you're in a high speed pursuit. I mean, I know this sounds completely crazy, and it is, but it's also kind of fun as long as you don't get caught. And we really didn't until the end. Um, so some people go bungee jumping, and that was like and that was my drug. Is like was my drug is adrenaline, so I didn't need the money for it, but the fix was the rush from doing these jobs.
And were you just doing them for yourself? Like you created the idea and executed, or
Yeah,
were you
and
a for hire?
so actually some of each. So I had a little crew I worked with. I had a good friend that came in, like we were the entry guys. We went inside. And then we had other people who were like surveillance and radio backup. Um, and then once we got good, like once we stole everything we needed, we had a fence we would give it to. So like by noon the next day, everything would be gone with the fence. But then we actually had people who would give us requests, like, hey, can you get me, X, Y, and Z? And because we're kind of doing bulk, it's like we would hit like CompUSA or Video Only or Circuit City. We'd like hit the big box warehouse stores. So if somebody's going to put a special order, we need a lot of them. We're just not like stealing one VCR. We're going to take a truckload.
Wow. So you're like this radio show host that takes requests. You're like, yeah, what do you need tomorrow? I got that.
We almost never did the requests because they were usually ridiculous and they weren't really appropriate. I mean, if burglary requests could be appropriate, right? It's like
Right. I don't know how that looks, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, I need this. Could you get that?
Yeah, it's like, oh, I need this one thing. It's like, well, we're not going to break into a store and steal one thing. I mean, unless it's like a Hope Diamond or something. that wasn't our gig. I guess the closest thing we did an art request, but that was just because we knew a guy who could move art. So here's one of my funniest stories. So we break into this gallery that has all this art, and we're stealing all of this. We had Delacroix's, Monet's. No, not a Monet. I'm sorry, a Renoir. Zhang, he's like a Chinese artist, made all this really cool stuff. A couple other things you probably remember. I can't think of the names right now, but the biggest name was Thomas Kincaid. Do you know who that is? Mm-hmm. Okay, so he had a showing there, and he had many originals and all of his prints. The whole gallery was filled with all of his stuff. And I actually don't like Thomas Kincaid. So we basically cleaned out the entire gallery of everything, and we left all the Thomas Kincaids. So I could just imagine the conversation the next day. He hears on the news that his gallery got broken into where his exhibit was. So he's calling the gallery. Oh my God, there's a burglary. What did they take? They're like, well, none of your stuff. So his takeaway was either like they must have really respected me as an artist and they didn't want to steal my stuff, or they didn't like me.
Right. It's like it's that one moment in your life where you're like, well, not me, but why not me?
It's like, but didn't they take one? Just one. The good one, right? The good one. Nope.
Incredible. So you said through all of that, then this is, you were on America's Most Wanted?
Yeah, so I was doing all the burglaries in Washington, and my partner dropped his pager, so that kind of got the cops onto us. And there's like a multi-jurisdictional task force, so we had King County, Snohomish County, a bunch of cities. The feds were involved because we had firearms we would use to shoot out the lights. So it was like then it was federal crime. And then we fled, and they were trying to catch us on America's Most Wanted for the Washington stuff. But by this point, I'm already in Arizona. So they run the show a couple times. They can't find me. And now, of course, I'm living in Isla Vista. And I'm also doing burglaries down there, including I broke into the sheriff's department and stole all their guns. So that story is a separate story. But part of that, when that came up, one of the LA detectives, he saw the America's Most Wanted for my Washington crimes, and he's like, "Oh, that kind of sounds like the guy that's down here." And then they ran the show again, and I think the guy that turned me in, it was some guy that saw me at study hall drinking beer. So here's more of the story. So I was actually fleeing the United States after the America's Most Wanted came out. I knew about it because somebody told me, and I was getting ready to leave to Mexico. And at this point, I was already in Isla Vista, which is right across the border from Mexico, if you're not familiar. And I had that girlfriend I told you about. She had a cell phone that she got out, and she bought me a cell phone in her name, and I owed her like $500 on the cell phone bill. So I drove all the way back up to Santa Barbara to put money on her back porch. Like she had a little jar that she would keep things in. So I wanted to pay off the cell phone bill because I didn't want a sticker with it. And I also had some other stolen stuff in a storage shed around, Santa Barbara. So I came, paid the bill, grabbed some things out of the storage shed. And as it turned out, the cops were surveilling her house. So they caught on to me then. And then we had this big, confrontation because they followed me to the to kind of Main Street, Santa Barbara. And there was like a little shopping center, the Paso Nuevo shopping center where Banana Republic was. And I bought a hat. I bought a Banana Republic hat, and they came out and kind of jumped me when I was coming out of the store. And I fought them. And it didn't turn out well.
Now, how long did you serve?
Yeah, so the California crime for breaking in the armory, they gave me 10 years, but I got halftime on it because it was like as a first time offender. So I did 5 years on that. And the funniest thing is, like burglary in California, like even though it was a Santa Barbara Sheriff's Department armory, it's still an unoccupied building. So it's really kind of a low level burglary because there's nobody there. So it's kind of like middle of the range points, which means I would just go to like a low or a medium security prison. But when I go through, kind of like orientation, I guess, in prison, they call it classification. They overrode my point status and put me all the way at the very, very top, like the most violent prison. Because they figured, I mean, look, the way I look, I got glasses, I'm a white guy, I'm kind of square. So they're like, well, he broke into our armory and stole all our guns, so we're going to put him in the very worst prison we have. And back in 2000 is when I was going through this. California had 160 prisons, and each facility would have multiple yards. And out of the 160 prisons, there's only 5 level 4 180s, and that's the actual yard I was on. So and the only way to get to that yard is if you have life without, or if you come out of the SHU, and the SHU is their like security housing unit. So that's where they're like the super violent people are coming out of the SHU. They go to the level 4 180, and that's where they sent me directly. It's like, poof, you're going right to that yard. And so I show up there, right? I'm like, hi guys. And like all these, buff tattooed guys with tattoos and just, mean looking dudes. They're like, dude, what are you doing here? And I'm like, well, I broke into the armory and I stole all their guns. What are you doing here? And they're like, oh, I'm here for robbery. Well, that's cool too.
This has been so far so interesting and exciting. And I don't even know if that's the right word, but learning all of these things. So to tell you, I used to watch America's Most Wanted as a kid. Like that was my favorite, like family. That was one of our family shows. We used to watch America's Most Wanted, Married with Children. I'm starting to question my upbringing, but these were like our shows. So I mean, and I know Adam Walsh's story, and I watched the movie about his son countless times and what motivated him to get into what he's doing, which then would bring me to what I would like to ask you. what motivated you to get into the nonprofit Prison Scholars program that you are involved in?
Yeah, so how I got into this whole nonprofit game. So I was going through the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Department, or yeah, the Santa Barbara Sheriff's County Jail, like when I was going through sentencing. And of course, all the cops there hated me because basically I broke into their armory and I stole guns from them. And it was really bad. It was doubly bad for them because 6 months before I did that, there was like some kind of escape from the jail. So the sheriff had already spent like $1 million bolstering security, making the place bulletproof. And then here I come and I just break in and steal all their guns. The reason I did it is back in those days, just like today, the cops were shooting too many people. And in early, I think it was 99, some LA police officers shot a homeless woman who was defending her shopping cart with a screwdriver. And so, she's not supposed to have a shopping cart. They're trying to take it away from her. She had mental challenges and she had a screwdriver and she was threatening the cops. And so, these 2 6-foot whatever cops with all sorts of batons and pepper spray and everything else, they just gunned her down. And the reason it became news was because a motorcycle cop had just arrived and he was across the street and he saw the shoot and he called it a bad shoot. So he kind of broke ranks with the police and it became a big thing in the news. And I think those cops got in trouble. But the point was, she didn't have to get shot. And because Dirk does stupid things sometimes, he decided, I'll just go ahead and take all your guns. Which of course doesn't do any good because if you steal their guns, they're just going to justify a budget for more guns and, whatever. But that was my reduced thinking back then. So anyways, so then I get to prison and almost everyone in that county jail hated me except this one sergeant. He's really nice to me. And he would let me get books because like the only book they would let me have was the Bible. And after reading that 4 times and getting all the stories out of it, which are kind of cool sometimes, I wanted to read other things and nobody else would give me any books, but the sergeant was. And finally he was telling me, hey, when you get to prison, it's going to be a whole lot better because you can go to college, because he knew that I liked to study. So I was all excited. So I get, when I finally land at prison, I start to learn about, hey, how do I get this Pell Grant so I can go to school? That's when I found out the Pell Grant was taken away from prisoners in '94 during the War on Crime, Tough on Drugs Day, or War on Drugs, Tough on Crime Day. So I couldn't believe it, and actually the Pell Grant just got reinstated this year, which we have a role in that. But anyways, in the early 2000s, there was no Pell Grant. And also there was no college prison programs. While the Pell Grant was in existence, there was about 350 college prison programs across America. When they took the Pell Grant away, that dropped to about 8, maybe 10. And so if you want to be, and that's why it's really bad thinking, it's like if you want to reduce crime, you increase opportunities for education and rehabilitation, because that gives somebody a path to not being a criminal anymore. But of course, their idea of being tough on crime was being tough on criminals, just being really hard on them in prison. But that really doesn't solve the problem. So of course, I get to prison, find out the Pell Grant was taken away. I'm just kind of stuck. And it took me about 2 years to get my dad back on board, Team Dirk, because, he wasn't too excited to hear that I had gone to prison for all this stuff. But he still loved me. And it took me a couple of years for me to get, so I finally convinced him to start paying for my education, and he did. And I was off and running. Long story short, I got a couple degrees from Penn State through paper-based distance education. You have to do it through the mail. It took about 10 years to get my 4-year degree. But during that journey, a lot of people would see me studying. I'd be in the day room with all my books and, doing my schoolwork, and people would come up all the time and they would see me and they're like, oh my God, I would do the same thing. And they would ask me, how are you doing that? It's like, what do you tell them? It's like, well, the Pell Grant doesn't exist. I mean, unless you got a rich dad or, of course, my dad's not rich. He's a middle class, but he could pay for the tuition. If nobody's paying for the programs and the programs don't exist, what are you doing in prison? TV, pinochle, push-ups. That's it. That's all. A lot of TV. So, your whole life is on pause for many, many years.
So you said that it took you 10 years to get your 4-year degree. Remind me again how long you were incarcerated.
Yeah, so I was incarcerated from 1999 to about 2015. So I guess that's about 15 years. Because I had that 10 years in California and I did 5 years of that because I got all my good time. And then after that, I got transferred to Washington, where I had, all my Washington crimes waiting for me.
So you go to college in prison, you get your degrees, as you mentioned. You have people coming up to you inquiring about how to do this for themselves and to create a better outcome for themselves. What does that do inside you?
Yeah, so I think a lot of my crimes were based on like I have a lot of energy, and sometimes I just do stupid things. And I think starting a nonprofit is kind of a stupid thing because they're really really hard to run, but it's like it's mission driven. Like uh, you see this huge gap, and there's definitely a need. And I was lucky. It's like and part of it is the guilt maybe of you're going to school, and you're no different than this other guy. And that's the other thing I should really say about prison is everyone has seen all these prison movies and they picture this terrible environment with all these crazy people until you get there and you're like, oh, they're just like me. They're just regular dudes that made some mistakes. My first cellie in California, he got 25 to life for stealing Advil, and he was a heroin addict. So by the time they caught him stealing $60 worth of Advil, they rolled over that misdemeanor into a third strike felony and they gave him 25 to life. Now a lot of laws have changed in California, so I'm sure he's probably out. When I ran into this guy back in 2000, I guess, he was looking at 25 to life, which means he's pretty much never going home. But anyway, so you run into people that they're not terrible people, they're not monsters. They're just as smart as you. They're just as hardworking. They want to change their lives just as much, but there's nothing. It's like there's no opportunity. They don't have a dad that believes in them or has the capacity to give. So I started a nonprofit, and I kind of, and the side note there is before my dad got on board to pay for my stuff, I was already trying to raise money by like selling artwork from prisoners or calendars. Or I was trying to figure out something I could sell from prison to pay for my tuition. So I hadn't really solved that puzzle yet when my dad stepped in to pay for my education. Before I was a student at Penn State, I was taking a whole bunch of psychology courses from University of Colorado at Boulder. They didn't offer a degree, but they had a really great psychology department. So I took like 7 psychology classes, probably as a means of introspection, just wondering, what the is Dirk? Like when I was reading all these textbooks, David Myers, he was the author of like 3 of them. So I just started writing to him, and he was in Hope, Michigan. So we started a pen pal relationship. But I never wanted to ask him for anything because I didn't want our pen pal relationship to be a hustle. Like this guy is writing me from prison for like, coffee money. And then as it turns out, as I was transferred from California to Washington in 2004, he sends me $1,000 out of the blue. And he's like, hey, here's for your nonprofit. Good luck. And that money was enough for me to get my 501c3 status, which took me about a year. And offer our first scholarship, which the first scholarship went to my last cellie in California. And then once you have your 501c3 status and some operations, you're a nonprofit.
So you started this while in prison.
Yeah, we got our 501c3 in February 22nd, 2006.
That's amazing.
And this is just another testament to how awesome my dad is, because I'm the one in prison and he's the one on the streets bouncing all the mail. And he's retired from the FDA at this point. So he's not a business guy. He's like just a government worker. He's an entomologist. So it's not really his thing. But he's on board for crazy ideas too. So he's helping me bounce all this mail. I'm doing all the work from prison. And we just made it happen.
But so I would imagine it's minimal what you're given and the tools that you were be able to create and how innovative you were and driven. Like you said, you are motivated by adrenaline. And I think that you channeled that adrenaline into a different direction that was extremely positive.
Yeah, it's just, I love to find challenges or that seem insurmountable and finding a way around them. And both of my criminal history kind of reflects that. Is also like running a business from prison is not too easy. So like half the game is just knowing policy. And the prisons would try to shut me down all the time, but I knew the policy better than they did. And so I'd always be just right on the right side of not quite breaking the policy. And they would try to stop me all the time. And like one of my friends who's also out of prison now, he says the epitaph on my gravestone will be, quote, "Go ahead and bust out that policy," because they'd always try to stop me. Like everyone knows you can't do this, but I knew the policy. It's like, oh yeah, well, go ahead and show me the policy that says I can't do that.
You've shared so many like jaw-dropping things that are extremely interesting, and I am finding it fascinating the progression of how all of this happened for you and eventually getting caught and the wonderful things that that's turned into. What is something that would surprise people to know about you after all of this?
When I first got out of prison, and I was still on work release, I got accepted into a University of Washington nonprofit management program. So uh, my first 2 weeks into that program, I didn't want to tell anyone I had been in prison or I was on work release. So I was like, I was like, what do they call it? Passing. I was passing of being a normal citizen, and I was just seeing how people would respond to me as just a regular dude in a nonprofit management class. And it was kind of cool. Like nobody really cared. And then when I finally like did the reveal, it's like, okay, well, I'm in work release, and here's what I'm running, the Prison Scholar Fund, all this stuff. And the acceptance was just amazing. It's like you would, I think the criminal justice reform conversation has changed over the years. Maybe in the 90s and maybe in the early 2000s, it wasn't so cool. But by the time 2015 rolled around, criminal justice reform was a thing. So I'm kind of riding this wave of reform. And when I tell people ex-prisoner, Prison Scholar Fund, then it's actually really cool. And then an example of that is right after the UW nonprofit management program, I won first place in a social venture partner fast pitch, which is like a business plan competition. So I kind of do like a TED talk on a stage, and I won first place for that, which is really amazing because I'm an introvert, right? And I practiced this thing 300 times, and I still get on the stage, and I'm just terrified. Like, I mean, I could barely function, but I watched the video, and I look natural in the video, but inside my head, it's just terror and screaming. But then again, I like the adrenaline, right? So after I won that thing, I got that little TED Talk video, and I used that to apply to Stanford, and I got into their Social Entrepreneurship program, which is a residency program at the business school. So if you can imagine, after 15 years in prison, poof, you're at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. And instead of hiding my story, of course, I led with my story, which was that TED Talk about my whole story. And then when I get there, one of the professors, Jennifer Aker, she's like the marketing professor, she used the Prison Scholar Fund's website as a case study on how to do social media marketing correctly, because we were celebrating the stories of the people we supported. And so that was super cool. And then the finance professor, later in the course, he used social impact bonds with the example of prisoner education being a social impact bond, perfect example. And it was really cool because like as he's doing the speech, I think I raised my hand for a question, and he sees my name tag and goes, "Oh yeah, I heard we had an expert in the class." So like Stanford's a magical place, and then all of a sudden to be like identified as, not a piece of shit. that's that's pretty cool.
I love that.
And
I love it. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
it's like, and that doesn't happen. Like, if you really think about the whole story, this magical journey happens because I had a dad who didn't give up on me, and he paid for my tuition. And the point is, there's a lot of people in prison just like me that needs that second chance too. They don't have the dad that leaves them, or whatever the situation is. And I don't think my reinvention or this wonderful path that I created should be based on luck, because I was lucky that I had this opportunity. Everyone should have that opportunity and see what they can do.
I love that. And I really admire you for coming full circle and really, you know, really making this life work for you, but giving back to where you've been. And I think that there's a lot of people in your position that would take that opportunity and use it for themselves and not apply it to the other people in their surroundings and how they can help them too. So I think that speaks a lot to who you are and why you've been able to accomplish what you have. And I'm glad to know you now. That
Oh,
is
thank you.
amazing.
It's,
Um,
it's funny what you say, because like if I was a little bit smarter, I wouldn't be running a nonprofit because the pay is terrible. And it's so, I mean, even though it seems like we have a lot of success, it is so hard to raise money for prisoner education. And yeah, it's just, it's not easy and it's not rewarding except the impact. When you see the lives that you change, and these people are just like you, they're your brothers and sisters. They did something stupid.
I think that that is so commendable though, like I said, that the part someone asked me recently why I do these interviews, and it's because exactly what you said, the people that I walk past on the street every day, they're just like me. I just don't know them yet. And I want to know their story. And the feedback that I get from people that share their stories is why I keep filming and why I keep being so nosy because I like to know. But in reality, it's what you said, and it's what you get from helping, meaning the story and how the person feels, not that you feel a type of way. It's what they feel because of the work you've put in and because of the platform or the chance and opportunity that you're giving them. And I think that makes all the difference in the world. And that feeds your adrenaline, right? And you say that rush of that thank you and seeing what they've accomplished makes me want to do it again.
It's funny. A side story is that David Myers, a psychology author, and he did all his research on um, philanthropic kind of giving. And like one of the questions is it truly philanthropic if it's not anonymous? And like, a lot of people make gifts and they get some kind of, social reward in return. And even if you don't advertise the gift you give and you feel good when you give, then it's not truly like altruistic. It's like you're getting a benefit of giving, which is making yourself feel good. So it's interesting on why people really give. And maybe this really the struggle for me is like my adrenaline rush. It's like there's my newest fix is the good feelings I get from helping other people, as opposed to the good feelings I get from stealing guns from the cops, which is also pretty cool.
Well, I'm glad your good feelings come from good work now. That's for sure. Well, before we close out for today, and I'm sure like everyone that's watching this, they could stay tuned for another hour and hear more Dirk Van Velzen stories, but we could probably do a second update at some point. But for now, I have one question I do want to ask you. How many prisoners have you helped at this point?
So we're at 130. And out of the 130 we've helped, I think 85 have been released. And out of the 85, we only have a 4% recidivism rate, which compares pretty good to the national 68%. So we're doing great. But, because I'm a data nerd, it's like you could say that a lot of the people we help are the ones most ready for change. So maybe we're helping the people least likely to reoffend. But still, I think our data is pretty good and we want to do more of that. And we also want to analyze our results to really compare apples to apples and that good stuff. So we're working on, better data-driven outcome research.
Well, I'm excited to hear how it continues to grow and the success you continue to have. But to be respectful of your time, I'm going to go ahead and ask you our final question after I say a quick thank you so much. I know we did a lot of back and forth getting this time to sit down, and I am beyond grateful. I hope you know that. And I am extremely interested in what you're doing. I think that serving humanity is a huge plus and it's something that's needed. And I want to continue to learn about it and continue to know about what you're doing out there and helping people. And I think it's amazing. So thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And now, as you are out there doing your prison scholars good work, trying not to rob any other places. No, I'm just kidding. But seriously, as you're out there in the community and either it's fundraising for prison scholars or just living your best life now after prison, what is something, if you had the opportunity to hold up a sign that said one thing about you, what would you want people to know about Dirk?
Oh boy, I'm gonna steal this from a shirt that I got from one of my so I'm in this group called Just Leadership USA, and it's a criminal justice reform group, and we got these shirts and it says "I am human" on it, and I think that shirt is has a double meaning because a lot of people in our group are people of color. And in society, they're not always viewed as human. And then maybe that's the same way we view prisoners. So it's funny when I wear this shirt that says I am human, I probably get a different response than people of color get, which is people think it's funny when I wear this shirt because they don't know the backstory. But I think we're all human in that way, whatever we look like and whatever baggage we carry.